You are listening to the Bravo Creative Podcast, hosted by Tom Baker. Thank you for listening. Your position has been triangulated. Drone Army has been dispatched to your location. Commencing attack run in 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the Bravo Creative Podcast, Episode 1. My name is Tom Baker. I am a freelance videographer, video editor, cinematographer, actor, and director. And I'm the owner, operator, videographer, editor of a small video production company named, you guessed it, Bravo Creative, in the beautiful Rogersville, Missouri. And we're just a few miles outside of Springfield, Missouri. And if you're not local to these parts, I am located in the southwest corner of the great state of Missouri, the Show Me State. I primarily produce digital content for small businesses and non-for-profits, and every now and then I do some corporate work. And recently, I've had the pleasure of working on quite a few film sets as either a DP or a director of photography, for those of you not in the biz. But very recently, I just wrapped on a film where I got to be in front of the camera. Yeah, I actually had a major part. What a ride that was, and it was so much fun, and it was quite a challenge, and I'll talk more about that project and my experience on the set here in a few minutes. But first, I want to introduce my lovely and talented guest today. This person I will just say this person, I attribute a lot of my success in life and a lot of my ability to get out there and be creative and have the confidence to do it. I attribute it to this person. This person is my lovely and beautiful wife, Michelle.
Hi.
And I'll just be honest with you. This is about the 100th iteration of this first podcast. I have gone back and forth and back and forth
but
and back.
But it's my first. So
it's your first.
This will be the best.
This is the culmination of a very heated discussion with other people last night that got me very inspired in a way, and I finally just said, you know what? The
key is Michelle.
The key is the woman that got me here. So I brought you in on it, honey. So what I want to do first is I kind of want to talk about this podcast, kind of what my grand vision of all of this is, and what I want to aspire to as far as this podcast, and what I think the listeners can glean from it. So before we get into too much of me and all that kind of stuff, from a 20,000 foot view and a wide angle lens, this podcast is about creativity and the ways in which we get to it and use it and massage it and harness it and then ultimately do something with it. And because primarily that process, and you can probably agree, has always intrigued me. I've always thought about it. It's been a lot of stuff that we talk about.
Yes.
And we've always tried to kind of figure out, especially like when I would go through like a writer's block, how do I get out of it?
Right.
And I think all of us are a little different in the ways in which we use that creative muscle, but I think there's a kind of a commonality that we can all kind of use to get ourselves up off of our butts and kind of do something with it.
I think part of it is, having someone, whether it be a friend or a group or your spouse or a parent, whoever, a mentor, that can talk through it with you, because that really is the creative process.
It's kind of unpackaging it. Yeah.
Of minds. And we've always said, we do well together because we're, different sides of the same coin, where you want to run in charging and get it done. I'm a little bit more careful and process oriented. And the truth is that people like one side or the other, but it's hard to find one person who does both well. So you have to have people that you are in your circle and help you with that.
Even when you're looking at like I'll just talk about like being a director of photography in general. it's a very, very left, right brain type of profession, because you are injecting in a lot of creativity and composition and things like that. But you're also, there's a very technical side to it as well, and knowing how to pull off those things.
I think that's a little unique, especially for you, though, that you do use both sides. I think just
sometimes to my detriment.
Sometimes I think it locks you up a little bit, which is probably maybe pretty common for people with the same, I don't want to call it a problem, but the same thought pattern process.
It can be a problem, though.
It can be.
Yeah, in certain situations, it can be a problem. It can hang you up quite a bit.
Typically, and my background's more in theater versus video production, but I've worked both sides of the stage, as a music director, and also helped out backstage and also on the stage. And you don't find too many times people that enjoy both. It's either you make do doing the backstage to kind of lend a helping hand, but you really enjoy the onstage, or vice versa. You don't really want that spotlight or the creativity and putting yourself out there of acting. And so I think you're a little different in that way from at least the people that I've met. And that's kind of the interesting thing, the perspective. I think that is interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I think, it's like there's the one, I think there's one side that, especially when you're looking at like director of photography, I've definitely met people that really, really get jazzed on the technical side of it.
Right.
And then I've seen people that really get jazzed on that. But the ones that can kind of find a balance in between the two, or at least have a person that they can help them with the technical side, or they have someone that kind of fill in the gaps on the creative side. Mm-hmm. But if you are kind of on that island all alone, like I am, and basically doing, kind of a small shop that's making videos kind of guerrilla style and on the fly,
you have to do everything.
It kind of keeps me in the center. And so it's fun sometimes, especially, since we've moved here to the Springfield area, it's been fun getting around people that maybe are uber technical, but they're maybe not as creative.
Right.
And so then I can kind of jump to that side and I can play that role for a little bit, and then, vice versa. And so I think that's where getting back to creativity,
right,
and kind of what this podcast is about is basically just discussions like this, and trying to find an understanding, but also finding that understanding and that knowledge, but also gaining confidence on it. And I think that's what gets us up off of our butts to actually get out there and put something out there for people to see, or to scratch that creative itch,
right.
And
can I put into the universe right now that I've wanted you to do this podcast for a long time?
Yes, you can.
Like, that's official. It's been recorded.
You have, and this is something that I want to kind of, not to get too platitudes and wax poetic and all that kind of stuff, but I do want to put out there that if you're listening to this podcast, and thank you very much for listening to the podcast, but one thing that I want to stress is that, and I'm going to touch on this in a second, but one thing I really want to stress is find that group or that person in your life that not only appreciates what you do, but appreciates the time that you have to put into it. And those people are really important to have in your life. And I can only say that just from living with this wonderful woman for as long as I have, is that she has appreciated, and she does know how much time and how much struggle and how much pain and blood and how much joy you ultimately get off of it. And it's good to have those people in your life, whether you're fortunate enough to have them as your spouse, but just having a group or a person in your life that kind of helps you and gives you that confidence to get going. It's so, so important. And I think we kind of skip over that a little bit when we talk about creativity or being an actor or being a DP or whatever, and that's a funny story, is that one of my favorite director of photography, his Roger Deakins, his wife is like his right-hand person. on a lot of his stuff.
She's the get it done person.
She is the get it done. And she's the one that tells him, okay, you got another 5 minutes to get this light figured out, and then you got to start rolling.
Right.
But she understands how to deal with him. And in some ways, they are it's a symbiont kind of relationship in a way. And that's really cool. Like if you have somebody that can kind of crank your right brain on this side and crank your left brain on this side and kind of play you, I think it actually does, like, it is a good thing to have going into the rest of your life. So that is what the podcast is about. The podcast is about that creativity. And my wife has been the one that has pushed me for a long time to do it and I think part of it too is she's tired of listening to me talk about it all the time. And I think she thinks that if I have a podcast and I go talk to other people, then we can talk about like the kids more, or we can talk about some of the things in our own life, maybe a little bit more than
we'll probably still end up talking about it.
We'll still talk about it.
It is what it is. Yeah. But I think the other part of the podcast too, that I wanted you to do this, is really a little bit the pay it forward type of thing too, because you've really been educated. I don't want to say self-educated, because we live in a time when you can access so many experts online. You can check out podcasts. You can
YouTube,
go, and really you are awesome at exploiting all of that and really being a self-directed learner, which I've always thought is awesome, because I'm more of a, hey, maybe I'll go back for my master's. That sounds interesting. Right. But that would be the last thing on your mind, but you will totally spend a month and get absorbed and obsessed with buying a new camera or learning a new technique on editing software, or, I mean, whatever. Right. And I think those people are wonderful and they put themselves out there, but you have a unique voice that you can add to that as the industry changes, as there's more individual markets and independent films being made because of the circumstances of
because
this
everything's
year.
Shut down.
Yeah. That it's a new voice. It's a, hey,
well,
you
I mean,
can
even
do this.
Even from like a theater perspective, which is,
Right.
I mean, in theater is very near and dear to us because that's how we met. We actually met 25 years ago.
It's been
almost 26 years ago, isn't it?
I was a toddler.
I wasn't far from a toddler.
I wasn't, but.
Well, and that's funny, so Michelle and I met in 1994. Now, granted, we didn't date, but we knew of each other in 1994. Michelle was a little bit younger than me. She was about 4.5 years younger than me. And we met. We were both in a Jeff City community theater, the Jeff City Little Theater production of West Side Story. We were both sharks. We were both chorus members. Do you remember what your name was? Your character's name?
I'm assuming I was chorus member or Shark Girl number 5.
I was Wano. Wano was my name.
You were farther up the ladder.
Well, that's just because they didn't have enough.
Well, you're a guy.
Yeah, they didn't have enough guys that like.
If you're a guy in theater,
could sing and dance, and honestly, and just kind of a funny tidbit. This was the first show I had ever done. And I did this on a dare. I was actually chasing another girl at the time who I thought was going to audition for this show.
And for all you manly men, he had just gotten out of the Navy.
I just got out of the Navy.
So it's like the most un-Navy thing you could think of to do was, hey, I'm going to do community theater and a musical, jazz hands.
Well, and that, that's it's something else that is just totally baffled me most of my life is that going in, and we have a 125-pound Labrador that's Hoss. He's laying down at our feet right now as we're doing this podcast.
He's being good.
But I went into theater not with the intent of having it take up most of my life. And I do have to say is that some of the greatest moments and times and things that have happened in my life happened because of the relationships and the people that I met and the lessons that I learned from either being on the stage or the people that I met. And I think that's something that I think it's why it's near and dear to me. And I'm sure it is for you.
Absolutely.
For the most part.
Well, I mean, when we met, I would probably say I was the one obsessed with theater.
You were more obsessed than I was, yeah.
I had a master plan to do a lot of different things. I had a path that has changed as the time has gone by. I mean, as everybody has, you know, it twists and turns and for the better, you know, you end up where you're supposed to be. But when I started, you know, I was definitely the obsessed person, and you were like, hey, you know, this will be fun. I can pick up some chicks and it'll be great. And then as
mission accomplished.
I guess, yeah. Good idea, guys. There you go. If you need to meet someone.
And I would even go so far as to say that in some ways, like you played professional sport. I'm not professional. You played sports.
Yeah, I played high school sports. I did a lot of stuff. I've
Tennis and theater. Which one's harder?
Hard in different ways. Sorry. This is my indecision. Tom has to live with.
I mean, I would go so far as to say that on average, most theater productions, as far as athleticism, as far as, you know, threading the needle and working to near perfection, it's more demanding in a theater stage production than you're going to find in a tennis match or even playing like high school golf. So, I mean, guys, if you're looking for something that's very challenging and it's going to take you outside of the box, and I know that there's a lot of guys out there that, and I'm only speaking for myself, is that it was one of those things I looked at and said, no, I'm a little too manly, man. But the reality of it is that it is very hard. It is very difficult. It is very time consuming. But you want to talk about a high of getting on stage and being able to move an audience. And I think that was the biggest draw for me that kind of kept me coming back for more.
Yeah. And it's tough. It is it's really quite honestly why I don't do as much theater now, because I have full-time job and kids and other interests. Because when you commit to doing a show, if you do it right, it really absorbs your life it takes up your life. I don't know the right word for that.
Probably 2 months, 2 to 3 months if you're really working on it.
If you want to do it the right way. And I think you get to a point with your craft that if you're not going to do it the right way, it's not worth doing.
Yeah.
You want to get absorbed. You want to get obsessed so that when you have your performance, you're proud of it.
Right. And we're talking about community theater here, folks.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's my wheelhouse.
Right.
So I can't really offer too much with the film except for what I support with, you know, what you've been doing.
Right.
And also, I mean, a little pat on my back. I was, I guess, the producer for our son's Sato film.
That's right.
Did pretty good.
And if you all know anything about the Sato
so
48, the Sato 48 film competition in Springfield that is graciously put on by Jeff Klinkenbeard and Jaw is an awesome networking opportunity in this town. And even if you don't like doing film, it's still a fun exercise in team building a team and doing something that's damn near impossible to get done.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's a ton of fun. They have an awards ceremony, and you know, there are people that get upset because they didn't win an award, and I was one of them. But
you won an award.
I did this last year. The first year we didn't. Okay. But I will just say that Michelle and the kids did their own this year, and they kind of rose to the challenge, and they did. It was an awesome little film.
We got nominated a lot. I don't think we won anything.
I don't think you won. I think you got a runner up, and then you got a bunch of nominations, and there's a reason for it, because it was a fun little film and it stuck in people's brains. Nobody else did a silent film. You all did a silent film, which was...
You know why we did is because you were always like, the audio will always go
Audio is
down.
always going to suck.
And I'm like, okay, we need to get around that.
Well, and that's resource filmmaking. You know, you look at the resources that you have available and you go, okay, we're not gonna win on audio on this one. So, and it'll make or break your film too. It almost broke our film, was the audio. Mm-hmm. But getting back, because we've gone like, and which is typical of us, we've gone off on a tangent. But going back to kind of where we started and what we got into is we both had a love for theater. You kind of took off. So Michelle, a little background on her. We started dating, oh gosh, it was a couple years after. It was about 2 years after West Side Story. We started dating about it was kind of towards the end of 95.
96.
It was about a year later, I guess. But anyways, we started dating. We had a great time doing shows together. And we used to do a ton of shows together.
Yeah.
You know, it was like boom, boom, boom. You always had the lead parts. I was always a chorus person for the most part.
Oh, come on.
Well, no, and it was. But, you know, that was the cool part, was that you could see how you had spent a lot of time trying to perfect your craft. And you realized that you could see that, at least I could, going back, looking at how you were very polished on stage. And you had worked a ton on your voice and your singing ability. And I remember, when was that? That was like in 97. You know, you had just gone to college. So
okay, so it would be 97 or 98.
You went to college, and I was doing Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yeah.
And this is like the night that this thing happened to me, and it changed my idea of theater. And it changed it so bad, it shook me so hard that I didn't do theater for another 2 years.
Okay, for the context, I was in music school.
She
I
was
a little bit on my pedestal.
So you went to, Michelle she went off to Indiana University, the home of the Hoosiers, and she was pursuing a opera degree. Is that correct?
Music degree in opera.
Music degree in opera.
Yeah.
And I was back home in Jeff City, and I was doing a local production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And it was one night after the show. Michelle was back in town. You were backstage with us, weren't you? Watching the show.
I think it was a break. I was helping with costume changes because you had mentioned
Michelle
it was
was back there. Yeah, it was. It was a tragic. It smelled too. It was a bunch of dudes. The costume changes,
not the show.
Yeah. So we got back there after the show, and we were getting ready to head to a cast party, and we're sitting out in the parking lot, and I was so excited. I thought I had just nailed this, whatever part it was. I think it was Zebulon or whatever. And I really felt like I had just nailed it. And I was just so excited about my performance. I was ready for Michelle to just be so impressed with me and go, hey, you know. Anyways, we sit in the car, and I asked her, I said, so how did I do? And don't ever ask if you don't want to know the real answer from someone that you love, because if they really are good for you, they'll tell you the truth. And do you remember what you said?
I think it was along the lines of, you just need to be bigger. You think you're bigger, but you're not bigger.
And if you're not familiar with Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, it's
bigger
Andrew
show.
Lloyd Webber. It's a very
jazz hands.
It's a very big show.
Caricatures.
Right.
You know, it's not the minutia of film production.
Right.
And so and
I'm naturally a very subtle actor
I'm
anyways,
sure
in a lot of things.
Some people listening to this are like, oh, musical theater. Blah. But
ta ta ta
ta ta. But you know, you have to adapt for the medium that you're doing.
It's true.
And that is always with musical theater is
but
people think they're big, but they need to be bigger. You're playing for a room of people rather than a camera that's right next to you.
Well, and
so it's different.
And after that, basically, so that shook me. I was pissed.
Yeah, he was not happy with
I was
me.
livid mad at her. I was like, how dare you? You know, I poured my soul out, you know.
But everybody who knows Tom is like in their car listening to this right now going, vindication. So see, guys, he got it just as much as he gave it.
And you're right. You're right. But so I basically didn't do theater for another 2 years after that. That was the last show. I left. I actually moved to Indianapolis for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then we got married shortly after that. Moved back to Jeff City after a year. And then we did about a 6-year run of doing just about every possible show that we could do.
Oh, man.
In Jeff City. And it was crazy.
And
crazy.
I mean, in the process, too, I ended up getting a business major from the Kelly School of Business at IU, which is also an amazing school. Free plug for Kelly School of Business. I'm not sure if it's still called the Kelly School of Business, but with a music minor, which I enjoyed as well. It's just, you know, it was just a different path that I was wanting to go into.
We fell in love.
We did.
We decided we wanted to have a family.
Yes. And you know what, too? And this is another tangent. You can cut it out at some point if it gets too tangent. But,
no, we're not cutting this out.
But that is really the hard thing about being an actor, an actress, or in the entertainment industry is that as much as you want to say it's not personal, it is personal. You know, it is about how you look, how you hold yourself. For people that don't know me, I'm 6 feet tall, you know, and that's after having
6'1" to be exact.
Well, 6'1" before I had 2 of your children.
Right, that's true.
That were huge. But you know, it is very personal, and I think
if you're not willing to take that,
a very tough skin. You have to have a thick skin, and that became hard for me. And quite honestly, after I switched, I don't think I really sang for a couple years. I don't remember singing, and so
not in college. Yeah,
I mean, I did some vocal coaching and I did some opera choruses, you know, when I was in the business school. But after leaving school and graduating, we were in Indianapolis, and I didn't sing for a little while, and it's a very personal thing, and that's why it's so hard. It's so subjective. It's hard. You have to have a thick skin, but at the same time, you have to be brave enough to put your product out there, and that is the conundrum. Is man.
Well, it's about building your own confidence back again,
right?
And I would imagine there was a conversation between the two of us. Just because it seems right. I don't remember them specifically, but I would imagine there was a conversation, knowing what I know of you and knowing what I know of myself, is that there were conversations that I had to pick you up just as much as you had to pick me up to get out there and sing again and start doing that stuff. Because it is hard. The confidence isn't just, a lot of times it's not just yourself that gets your confidence going. It's the people around you that really push you and believe in you. I mean, heck, this podcast is a testament to that, because if I didn't have you constantly prodding me to do it, I mean, I look at you sometimes, I go, she don't know what she's talking about, because this is really tough. I
probably didn't.
And you may not now, you know, that's the reality of it. You may not have a clue.
You know, but I'm a good cheerleader.
You are a great cheerleader. But I think one of the things that's interesting to me about, you know, kind of how we got to where we're at is that I learned a lot from you. And then when I got back into like kind of theater, you got a bunch of lead parts when we got back. That's when you did like your Roxy Hart and your Maria, because we did West Side Story again. And what were some of the, you did like Spelling Bee and some of those really cool shows.
Songs for a New World, which is like one of my favorite soundtracks ever.
You got back in and you kind of came in with a force, and it didn't matter that you were 6'1" at that point, because you had a confidence. You kind of knew what you were wanting to get into. Mm-hmm. And you kind of told them, take it or leave it. And this is what I'm going to do. And it did for about probably 4 or 5 years. That paid off really well for you.
Yeah. And then we had kids.
Well, but before before the kids came along, I think you kind of rubbed off on me, and I started getting a lot more confident in my abilities, what I was able to do, because I started taking, that's that whole point in like community theater or theater when you do it for the fun of it.
Right.
But then you kind of cross this
threshold
that you go, okay, rehearsals are not fun. The performance is what I'm playing for, because I know that if I nail it, I'm going to be in the stratosphere as far as my euphoria that I get off of doing a show.
Right.
Whereas before it was like, oh, hey, we got the show done. Let's go out and let's go drink and let's go have a party. Whereas if you do a show right,
you're exhausted.
And you do a show really good, you're exhausted, but yet as soon as your adrenaline drops, you're out.
Right.
And that's always kind of that scary part of doing a show. You're like, oh, let's go out and have drinks, or let's go sit and talk. And then all of a sudden you're all sitting there, and then all of a sudden it's like everybody kind of hits the same point where your adrenaline drops. And then you're like, okay, I can go to sleep right now.
Yeah.
But with, outside of that, I think the idea is that I was able to see how you were able to navigate a lot of that stuff, and kind of pulled a lot of your confidence off of it. And then I started getting like the really meaty parts, like the ones that were like method acting, trying to get down into the deep, dark reaches of Tom. And that's when I really fell in love with theater. And you kind of tapped in, like, I like musicals, don't get me wrong.
You're a little bit of a play snob. Just admit it.
I am a play snob. Yeah, big time.
Whatevs.
I'm a huge, I love the classics. Love like your classic, your Arthur Millers and your Neil Simons. Those are just fun to me. But then I also love like your David Mammoths and that kind of stuff. And I just really jazzed up on, if anybody out there wants to have me in a David Mamet show, just give me a call, because I love them. They're extremely hard, but they're a lot of fun. And she's rolling her eyes because she goes, don't do a David Mamet show.
Can I veto that? Because when I have to help you with your lines, I'm like, you're never going to get these. These are too hard.
It's true.
You're going to need cue cards here in about 10, 15 years.
You want to listen to us argue.
Or an earpiece, like how they used to do with, was it Marlon Brando in movies?
Oh, a lot of them, though.
With earpieces, I'm like, you're going to need an earpiece at some point.
Yeah, if I wind up doing like, a show into my 70s, I'll definitely have to have an earpiece. There's no way I'd be able to do it. I've only got about another 5 to 10 years to do a Mammoth show anyways, and then there's no way I'd remember all that lines.
I mean, I think that's the challenging part of theater, is just the memorization, because it does get exponentially harder to memorize and lock that in to get to that point where you get on stage and it's like, it just comes to you. But on the film side, what intrigues me about it is to be able to do scenes out of order and still be like in the same character and frame of mind. Because in a show, you're kind of like at the beginning.
It is so excruciatingly hard.
But man, by the time when you have to be in it, anyway, moving on. I think that sounds like it would be hard.
Film, yeah, that is. To me, and I just wrapped on a film. I was actually my first film, like major part in a film that I've done. I mean, I've done tons of theater, but it was kind of translating those one to the other, and they're very different. Theater, number one, it's from head to toe acting, and there is no like main focus on any one part. I mean, posture, I would think, in theater performance is probably the biggest thing that you're, whether your shoulders are slouched or your shoulders are back, or, the way your tonal inflections and things like that, that all plays a big part. But then when you do like a film, it's like, the camera might just be on your face.
Right.
Or like there was one scene we did where the camera was just on my hand and I had to act with my hand So my hand model days came back to pay off for me. But
peanut butter hand
my
model
Jif
days.
peanut butter hand ads. But you know, but that to me, that was the fun part of film acting,
Right.
is because you know how to do it. It just takes a second to kind of bridge those synapses in your brain to go, okay, let me think about this okay, I can do this and I can do this. So it takes a little bit longer when you're getting into it. But the beautiful thing is that film is such a long process. It's like, okay, let's film this scene. Let's be super intense.
Right.
And now we're going to reset the camera. So 15 minutes, and then we're going to come back and do it exactly the same way again, but from a different angle. And you're like, oh God. And so, but you have time to think about it, and you have
Right.
time to process it. So if you're good at thinking through those things, then it is fairly easy. It's a ton of fun. It really was. I thought I was going to hate it. I really did. I thought I was going to be like, in some ways I thought it was going to be easy. And then whenever I got there, I realized I was a fish out of water on a lot of that
Right.
stuff. I was like, oh crap.
I think it's hard too if you've been on the production side, unless you're working with people you really trust. I mean, I would always be looking at what they're doing, like, maybe you should try to do this. You know, would be a better choice here.
Right.
And I don't think I remember you ever saying you did that during this past experience, which I'm pretty impressed with, you know.
I didn't a lot. I mean, I will say that was one thing that gave me a lot of confidence on set, was that being a filmmaker, being a director, working on sets before, it's really easy to pick out who's doing a good job and who's not doing a good job, you know?
Right.
And so from an acting standpoint, you spend a lot of time observing as an actor. I mean, if you're on set, you're kind of watching everybody get everything set up. You can walk over to the, video village and see where the camera's sitting and looking at what the lighting's doing and all this kind of stuff. And so, you hear of a lot of actors that kind of do it in the opposite way.
Right.
There's a ton of actors out there that started out as actors and then became directors or whatever. There's not many that, started out as actors and became cinematographers.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of them that started out that way, but there's not that many that started out. I mean, I started out as an actor, but film wise, I started doing
Right.
directing and director of photography first, and then I moved into acting. So it was kind of a cool way to be able to pull back and watch people work and do some really cool stuff. And so it gave me confidence. It's like, they're doing that right, and they're doing that right. And I don't know what they're doing, but they look like they're doing it right. And so it was fun
Yeah.
in that sense, because it was cool to be an observer on it, but it was also cool because I also knew where the lighting was at because I was paying attention to it.
So you knew where your light was.
I knew how to
where
play my light.
And it was probably a lot better for the technical people because they could tell you knew.
I would think so. I would think it'd be easier in that respect. And I hope to have them on one day to be able to talk to them, but it was a
Right.
lot of fun. I mean, and it was fun because you don't ever get to play in that little box that you're sitting there looking at. There's somebody else always gets to play in there. And it was kind of cool being able to play inside that little box and go,
Yeah.
oh, this is cool. And that guy set the camera and it looks pretty good.
And do you ever find yourself when you're ever filming someone going, man, I would have delivered that just a little bit differently. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking, don't give a line reading. Don't give a line reading. Let them make their own decisions on this. And
I think we do it more so in theater than we do it in film.
It's kind of like, that's why I'm always afraid to do like the director part. I've done the musical director, which is great, but like the director part, I would totally be giving line readings.
Well,
like,
I would think
and not meaning to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, I think in theater, we have a tendency not to do it. That's a big no-no, and it's a big bop on the head as a director. It means that you're a horrible actor if you get a line reading from your director.
Or you're an over controlling.
You're a controlling director, right? But on a film set, I can see where it would be different. And I did see it a couple times. Jonna Voles was the director, and she had to. There was a couple points where it was like, this is because you're looking at an edit, an ultimate edit, because we know where this scene is going to move into this scene and piecing it all together. That's another good part about being an actor after you've been an editor, and that's also the downside, because you're watching how these pieces are going to be cut together. And I think one of the things that on a film set is because you can be doing a scene, like if we were sitting right here and they were filming it right now, there'd be 15 people standing around right now. And if you don't get that right, that means we got to do it again and again and again. Yeah. And we've got however many shots to get done the rest of this day. So you need to hurry up and get your stuff done. And so I can see where the director sometimes would go, say it like this, and let's move on.
Get it done. We do not have time for you to discover in your character how to say this the way I want you to say it.
Thinking about it and get going. So, and I think, I kind of go both ways on that, on as far as giving line readings, because it's all about making choices. And if the person's not making the right choice,
right,
in regards to the other thing, I think sometimes too, though, the director has a tendency to give the line reading to one person, but doesn't go to the other person and say, give them this. So hopefully they'll give you this, and so sometimes that
maybe it's not that person, but it's
a symptom
what they're getting from their fellow actor. That's not inspiring. That
which
delivery
for me, and we've talked about this a million times, is that acting, for me at least, is not only what I give to my fellow actors, it's what they give back in return. So if we're in that little play world that we're getting into,
right,
if you're fully invested in it and I'm fully invested in it, which happens in that rehearsal period, so that's why we don't dial it in at rehearsal. We go all in rehearsal. Or at least, 25 to 35%.
You missed my eye roll there.
Yeah, there was an eye roll there. What was the eye roll for?
Oh, in theater, it's you're looking for the rush of the audience, and
oh yeah, you're right.
It's kind of like, yes, in theory, every rehearsal is like a performance.
Should be.
It just doesn't always happen like that.
Well, right. Right. And I mean, it's like I remember Skip Schrock, who was our first musical director that we had when we did West Side Story. And we worked with him quite a few times after that. And, from the whole community theater kind of realm of things.
He was great.
He was one of the guys that taught me a lot about just vocal performance, because I am not trained. I'm not a trained singer, but I have played some pretty meaty vocal parts that I probably shouldn't have, but I was able to fake it till I make it. But Skip was one of those people that helped me. But one of the things that Skip always told me that I really, it's always been one of those things that's just intrigued me, is that if you're having a hard time hitting that high note, it'll be higher when you get an audience out there.
Right. And he was faster when there was an audience out there too.
Sometimes I remember we'd come off stage and go, Skip, slow down.
Yeah.
Because he'd feed off the audience. He was so awesome.
With Chicago, I was like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh,
and
yes.
you're just going to have to drag me off the stage and then get somebody. Make an announcement. I don't know. He was so fast. His tempos got so picked up. But I mean, that's the cool thing about theater, is the rush of that. But I think that's the cool thing about this podcast, is because you do have all those interesting viewpoints that you can visit to. And I think a lot of people have a wonderful idea for a podcast. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I think they're totally fun. I'm one of those people that in my old age, I guess, I love listening to people talk, and learning things. I'm not as much into listening to the radio. I'll go on a road trip for work and I'll listen to podcasts the whole time. And then I'll send them to Tom and I'll be like, hey, you should listen to this. You should listen to this.
Right.
And you're probably at the other end going, no, I don't want to learn about this. And I don't want to learn. But there
are some things that you send that I'm like, you know what, that's intriguing. I like that. And it adds to that conversation, obviously, later on. But there's
some random stuff in there. I get it.
Well, I think.
But my point in saying is that you look at a lot of podcasts out there, and I think it's a wonderful idea, but then they're only around for like a year,
The
or they
average
only have
podcast
so many
only
episodes.
lasts the first 10 episodes,
Yeah.
and then it's over with. The average
And-
podcast.
And I think it's because although that one idea is intriguing and people definitely want to know about it, this has many more facets and many more interesting people. And I think too, sometimes, and this is a little bit of soapbox of mine, is that we have become a society where our kids, if they're not going to be it when they grow up, professional musician, professional dancer, theater person, athlete, then it's not worth doing,
Yeah.
But number one, having the arts in your life is extremely rewarding. It will always be with you. It ignites a part of your brain that helps everywhere in your life.
Well, you're right.
And this is proof positive that, hey, if you want to put out a product, if you want to do it, it just takes initiative to do it. I mean, you look at our son Sam, he makes short little movies with his iPhone, and he made his entire Sado entry on his phone. He even edited it on his phone.
He did everything on it.
He did everything on his
bit
phone.
of it on his
I
phone.
mean, somewhat to the frustration of you, because you were like, download this on your computer,
Put it on your computer. Edit
do
it
this,
there.
edit there.
Yeah.
But he likes to learn things his way.
Oh, yeah.
And
To his detriment sometimes, but
said,
you know
hey,
what? That's
do
how
it.
you learn.
And you know what he did? And that was like, wow,
Well, and I think
you can create if you want to create. And this hits upon all those different points to put it together, and the knowledge that you can put something out there.
Well, and I think there's this idea that, if you're going to, like for me, for example, I got into photography about the same reason why I got into drama. I was chasing girls, basically. And not to say that I'm a misogynist or whatever else. It's just I like girls, and being
You're
a young guy, and that was what it was. And, I decided to join the yearbook club at the age of 13 years old because I wanted to get out of class. I wanted to meet girls. And the comic book that I was reading at the time, Spider-Man, his alter identity was a photographer, right? So
Yes.
it all three of those things matched up. And my dad had a really nice camera. And so I thought, hey, let's just do this. This sounds like a great idea.
right.
And, the thing is I didn't really think much of it. And then I started going out and I started learning how to use the camera. And I started seeing that I had an aptitude for it. And then I also got jazzed off of the idea of when the yearbook finally came out and I looked through the pages and I was like, oh, that's my picture. Oh, I took that picture.
Right.
Oh, I took that one. Oh, I remember when I took that one. And so then it became the story. It became all this. And I think that's how, even when you look at so for example, Michelle is a physician recruiter. And that's the nice term of what it is. It's actually basically
I'm actually a managing consultant.
yeah, a managing consultant would
But
be
that's what I do.
that would be the top echelon title. The second one would be a physician recruiter, and the bottom one would be a headhunter.
Yeah, we don't like that.
We don't like that term.
I don't hunt anything, especially not people's heads.
But
Thank you.
there is this thinking that I have is that you wouldn't really be as good at what you do right now if you hadn't gone through and done a lot of the acting.
Oh, 100%. It's,
And
there's a lot of stuff in life that
diction with your voice, just the way you present yourself and sound
Right.
on a phone, because 98% of your job is on the phone.
yeah, anymore.
Yeah.
I mean,
Especially with the pandemic, it's all about the phone.
right. And it's about meeting with clients. I tell people all the time, our kids, one is very outgoing and wants to be on stage all the time. the Sam comedy
He
routine
thinks.
is always in session. And then, our daughter is a little bit more reserved. She loves music, but
She's
more
coming around,
playing in a band. But she is coming around. And you know what? Maybe you don't have that kid that wants to be the center of attention, but the practice and the experience of getting up in front of people, it always amazes me when, like, the number one fear is it still like talking in front of an audience, and then it's death.
Public speaking,
and then death. And to me, that's ridiculous because
I mean, don't get me wrong.
I think death would be way worse.
Public speaking is difficult, though.
It is,
and we're not trying to disparage anybody that has to get up and public speak.
But the more you do it, the more it becomes more accessible to you to be able to do.
As with anything.
Yeah. And so I think it's great for kids to be able to do that and at least get a taste for it. So if they have to do it, they can.
Yeah.
They're not paralyzed by fear. And that's what the arts get you to, and that's what they introduce you to, and that's what they give you the opportunity to do. And so therefore, that's why they're important in schools.
One thing that's interesting about that is because we have one kid that has almost a stupid confidence of being up on stage, right?
Yeah.
And so everything that he does or says or whatever, he kind of looks at it as comedy gold all the time, or he looks at it as perfection.
Yeah.
And then our other child, she looks at it
and picks it apart.
And all she does is she
sees the flaws.
And so from a creative standpoint, that is, in a lot of cases, that's who you deal with. Mm-hmm. You have actors that you get up on stage with and they feel that the sun sets and, rises with their performance. And then you have others out there that are continually kind of, they're so unsure of themselves they can't make a decision. And I think that the thing is me and you are actually in the middle because we've kind of gone through both of those sides. I mean, you went through a phase where you thought you were the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you just didn't understand why you couldn't get cast in things, right? And that was because I think at that point you maybe kind of had a little bit of a chip on your shoulder. As with, I think most people that get in there and work hard at something and they get through it and they think that they should, but it's that point in which we all get bopped in the head.
Right.
That we truly get good at things because we go back in and we kind of start to marinate on that. And after a while, that voice that was given to you that says, you know what, you're not really as good as you think you are. It does kind of change you in a way, and it causes, I think that's the problem nowadays, is that, especially in community theaters, every time somebody comes up on the stage, they come off and everybody goes, oh, you were fantastic.
Right. It's good to have both voices.
It is good. It is
you
very
have
good.
to have the confidence to go up and put yourself out there. And you also have to have that inner critic, I guess,
right,
to be able to go and not stop learning. I think that's really the hardest thing from the technical side because the technology changes all the time. You'll come up to me and say, hey, hon, I'm going to buy this new camera. I'm like, don't you have cameras? I mean,
right.
What is that whole storage area downstairs for?
Right.
And the reality is there's always a bigger and better thing. There's always people using a better piece of equipment there. And then you have to be educated enough to know, hey, I don't need that piece of equipment because I can make do with this versus buying a new equipment. Or I definitely need that equipment and I need to spend the money. I'll be able to make that money up by doing projects. And that whole piece of it, quite honestly, it makes my head hurt. Like all of that. And I think really that's what having these podcasts and having the resources that we have now is so helpful in that. But it also makes the timeline quicker. Like you have to keep up. You have to move faster because everyone has the capability of moving faster. So you need to move faster.
You do have to move faster, but you also have to, part of the moving faster is because and this is just kind of my own thinking on it, is that there is a cup of being able to be good at something. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that cup, you can put all kinds of information into your head, but it doesn't fill that cup up, because sometimes, a lot of the times, it takes doing to fully fill that cup up. And you're really going to take advantage of the time that you have. I mean, let's just say you have a year to learn how to make films, okay? You can sit and watch films on YouTube about making films, but if you don't go out, and you will learn, you'll learn more within that year by making a film than you will by watching a YouTube video about making a film. Same with acting. You know, I mean, you can go to all acting class is, in my opinion, is it reduces the amount of time that it takes to learn acting. So, like, for example, it gives you more opportunities to act in front of people. Right. Yeah. It puts it on a weekly basis, opposed to when we were doing, like, back in the day when we started doing theater productions, we would act at rehearsals, but we were never being critiqued to the level that we needed to be critiqued. If you go to an acting class, you get critiqued every single week.
Right.
And you get an assignment each week. Learn these lines, have them ready to go by this day. So it's the amount of time that you can put in there into the actual act of doing. And that's the scary part, because it requires you or us to get up and start getting out there and doing something. Things. And I think for me, that's what this podcast is about. It's about giving people educating them on basically what I've come to realize over these years, you've come to realize over these years, what my other guests that I have coming on have realized over these years. And for people to realize that that's kind of the only way to get there is to do. And kind of a hint is that the first one you do is probably not going to be perfect. The second one is not going to be perfect. And in the case of this podcast and this episode, the 100th episode or the 100th try at this, which is about what this is. I'm being completely honest. So I started this process, and I'll just tell Michelle, I started this process in the beginning of September, when I was up in Jefferson City for a week rehearsing for a show I was going to do. And I started recording this process. That was the beginning of September, right? End of August, beginning of September. I started recording these. And it is now, folks, it is now the end of October.
Right.
So it is taking me 2 months. I've already recorded 5 podcasts.
And his goal is the beginning of November to get these out. So guess what? It's the last week of October.
Right. Right.
It's do or die time.
It's do or die time. And this is the goal, guys. And this is kind of the lesson to be gleaned from this, is that you can have a great plan. You can have a great idea. But that idea is just a bunch of malarkey unless you start it and finish it. And that is the reality of life. And it doesn't get any easier until you start doing it.
Yeah.
And each time you do it, it'll get a little bit easier and a little bit easier, and you'll figure it out. And what's amazing to me, and this is why I love you so much, and I just got to tell you this. I'm going to profess it to the world.
Bring it on.
The reason why I love you is because over the last 2 months, I have been a bear because of this. Have I not? Have I not?
You know, it's been an interesting year.
I've been a mess because of, I mean, let's face it, my business got gutted because my clients all couldn't produce anything. A lot of my clients are hospitals and in the medical field, and they just couldn't do anything. And it's no fault of anybody's but, you know, the coronavirus, I guess. And I'm sure we'll get in trouble for blaming the coronavirus, but I'm going to blame it. It's an organism, and I hate it. But
inanimate. It's okay, guys. It's not going to get its feelings hurt.
That's right. Well, we hope not. Viruses have rights too,
I guess.
But I think because of this and a lot of other things, it's that in order to be creative, and there's a great book that I've been reading. I told Michelle to read it, and it makes a lot of sense. It's called Poke the Box. It's by Seth Godin. It's a simple little read. It's like 80 pages, I think. But in the first 40 pages, if that doesn't light a fire under your butt, then there's probably not much out there that's going to light a fire under your butt. This is a really good book, folks. And I think you can get it for what? How much did you get it for on Amazon?
I think I got it for $7.
Like
for the
$7.
That's the Kindle version.
The Kindle version. I have a little paper book of like a regular.
I read mine on my phone.
I know. I like to highlight
You're
and
so old
make
school.
circles and stuff. But one of the things that he talks about in there is your ego. And how ego has gotten a bad rap as of lately. Like, oh, your ego's talking. But the reality is that ego and having an ego comes from confidence. It comes from your ability. But that ego is what drives you to doing a good job on things.
Yeah.
Because you got to keep up with your ego. And so ego becomes a very good thing to have. Well, what happened for me this year is because I didn't have those completion of projects that I typically have, I lost my ego in some ways. And now it's about getting your ego back. And thankfully to this wonderful woman across from me, I still have an ego because she still tells me that I'm handsome. She still tells me that I'm talented at what I do and I am really good. And she reassures me on that. And I do the same thing for her too.
Absolutely.
But that,
as you should for your spouse.
You should. If you don't, then
see, this
maybe try.
podcast can be about all sorts of things. You never know what you're going to learn.
Gosh, that is so creative.
Marriage advice.
But I think that goes back to that's what we want this podcast to do. Is we want to, if you don't have that voice in your life, we hope to be that for you.
Well, I think a lot of people struggle with it this year. It's been a tough year. It's been an emotional year. It's been different for people in different parts of the country.
There's a lot of people getting depressed right now.
There's a lot of people that if you lived a life of going a mile a minute before and then all of a sudden to stop and be in your house.
I don't know any people like that.
Oh, yeah. I'm not going to comment on that because you are that person. And you hang out with people that are those people.
It's tough though.
It is tough. And it's
a complete and different life change.
Man. And also a lot of structures and resources that were in place. Well, now they're not able to be in place for you,
Well, and that was the problem
and you
too.
have to do it yourself if you want to keep producing. And it's like, how do I do that? How do I do what I do with just me and a camera, or me with an iPhone, or me with a laptop? Like, how do I do that without just sitting down and watching, I don't know, The Simpsons all day long?
Well,
I don't know. Whatever you do.
In essence, you have to get creative.
You do. So creative is not just having this wonderful idea, but it's also doing what you do with the resources you have at hand.
Well, somewhere along the way, we got to this point that, and I think, it's like, doing a movie like it just got off of, is that there's a ton of resources and there's a ton of people and there's a ton of possibilities. But in some ways, creativity happens when you don't have those things.
You have limited resources.
And we're in a culture right now where, we can revive dead actors, right? We can have anything we want. And so what is going to be the downside to that if we don't limit ourselves? And that is where coronavirus or the pandemic or whatever you want to call it has caused some forms of creativity. I mean, lo and behold, I started a podcast. That is my outlet of creativity at this point.
Right.
And hopefully that spurs into other things. But it's that resource or that lack of resource. It's like you look at your best artists out there. Your best artists are the ones that have nothing. You know, Bob Dylan, when he started playing music, he didn't have a great voice, right?
Well, I mean, I'm sure people would disagree.
Some
with
people
you
would
on
disagree, but Bob Dylan was not like one of those guys who go, oh my gosh, I love listening to Bob Dylan's voice.
That.
Right? He was a songwriter. And he
Yes,
couldn't.
He had a message.
And I think
Yeah.
Bob Dylan was probably one of those guys that said, I'm tired of them singing that song like that. They need to sing it like this. Right?
Right.
And so Bob Dylan said, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. Studio came in, bumped him around a little bit, said, no, you need to sing the song this way. Then Bob Dylan said, hey, heck with you guys. I'm not in it for the money. I'm in it to go out and play music. And so then he went out and he sang the music the way he wanted to. He had concerts the way he wanted to. And
Did he produce his own records?
I'm sure he
Is
did
that what
ultimately
happened?
later on, because his music changed, you know, pretty drastically. His early stuff was very pop or, you know, kind of rock and roll oriented. And then
Right.
later on it moved into that very folksy singer-songwriter kind of.
Yeah.
And I mean, he kind of defined the genre in a way. And then a lot of people were able to come out and go, oh, I like that stuff too.
Yeah.
You know?
It's kind of interesting too, from my point of view, having a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old, seeing them as the future generation, where they're coming from. And really, this might just be our kids. I don't think it is, but they really don't watch that much like live TV. They don't watch
No.
sitcoms and stuff like that. They watch YouTube videos and TikTok, whatever. And obviously I don't watch any of those, but they watch snippets of stuff.
Well,
and they'll
yeah.
download a show if they find it interesting, and they'll watch it for as long. I mean, I don't even think our kids really know what commercials are outside of.
I know our daughter doesn't.
Yeah. So it's so different. And now, like, we sat down and had family movie night and downloaded a new release movie for $20 in our living room. And
Right.
it's like, wow, this is kind of nice.
Well, but
So everything is changing, and I don't
we would
know
have
how
never
that-
thought about seeing a new release movie growing up. I mean, we were both children of the 80s, and
Right.
we never would have in a million years ever thought, oh, wow, new release movie, and we're going to see it in our living room, and we don't even have to
With
drive
our
to the video store to go do it.
bubble TV,
Right.
or our projection
But, you know, I
big
mean,
screen.
that is kind of I mean, when you go back and look, like if you even look at just like the 1980s, there were
We're
three.
going to get on a really big tangent
Well,
now.
but there were three channels.
I'm just letting you know.
Well, no, this goes back into creativity. There were three channels, right?
Right.
Growing up, where we grew up, there was three channels.
The remote was your youngest child.
Right. There were three channels, and on average, there were 3 TV shows at any given hour of the night.
Right.
Right? So all your friends were either watching option A, option B, or option C, or option D. They weren't watching anything at all, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so then, even if you went to the movies on a Friday or Saturday night, which a lot of us did back then, we had the Capitol 4 Theater and we had the other Capitol 4 Theater. So we had a total of 8 possible movies that we could watch, right?
Right.
So on a Friday night, if you were going to the movies, you had option 1 through 8 to go see.
Right.
And you look at creativity back then and you're like, well, no wonder we were creative.
Had
Because
to be.
we had to be.
We
But
didn't
now
walk
there's
around with
so much
personalized
stimulus.
computers.
There's so much
Yes.
stimulus that goes around. Because we refuse to shut our laptops off. We refuse to shut our phones off. We refuse to go out and try to that FOMO of see what everybody else is doing. And we look at them, and we have our dog snoring here at our feet right now. But that goes back to the whole thing of creativity. Creativity was better back then. And honestly, that's why we have an issue with movies now. You know, everybody all complains, man, movies are just not very good anymore. They're just kind of, but it's because there are too many of them.
Well, and
There's too many people putting movies out just for the sake of putting movies out.
Right.
They're putting movies out because they want to cash in on something. And our auteurs are gone. It's kind of like what happened with the French New Wave movies, the films that came out in the 60s, 50s and 60s. is there was this huge influx of films, and then what wound up happening was French came back and said, we want to do it differently. And they did, and they changed the culture of film.
Sure.
And I think that's what we're getting ready to see here pretty soon, is we're going to see independent films that are going to come up that people are going to go, you know, we don't want to do films about that. You know, we can't afford to do Spider-Man films.
Right.
Or Avenger films, because those are all basically a big animated film anyways.
Yeah.
So I think that's where our creativity is going to go. If you all disagree or agree, leave a comment.
I mean,
But
it's an ongoing conversation.
it is an ongoing
really.
conversation, but it is a cool one though. And when you start looking at the nuance of it and how you break it down and think about it, is, you know, 30 years ago, it was completely different than what it is now. Like by a country mile, it was different. And that's what's kind of spooky about it, I guess, in a way.
Right. Yeah.
But
Well, and I think too, you know, when you know a lot about the technical side, you watch a movie and you're looking for different things.
sure.
You know, there's movies that I watch, and I mean, for all you snobs out there, I'm sorry, but I just watch it because it's entertaining. And
Right.
I don't like sad endings. I like
But if you see a
happy
bad actor,
movies.
you'll call out a bad actor though.
If I see an actor that bugs me, and quite honestly, some actors are critically acclaimed and they still kind of bug me, and I won't watch their movies. But that's a personal choice. But I know for you look at a movie, and if they make a cut at one part, or the lighting is weird or something, I mean,
I critique on all fronts.
the list could be endless.
Yeah, I critique on
And
all fronts.
You just cannot watch that movie. And you watch it, and I'm like, well, it was a really good movie. And you're like, yep, ruined it for me. Can't watch it. And then you have some movies that you're like, this is the best movie ever. And I'm like,
Right.
it's
And
not,
I'll watch it over and over
it's
and
not
over and over
entertaining.
again.
I
Yeah.
don't like it. I want a happy ending. So anyway, everyone is, they're like, Michelle, you're no longer my friend. And that's okay.
Well, we've been talking for about an hour and 15 minutes. You know what? I'm probably not going to cut too much out of this.
Really?
I liked a lot of it. I thought
Okay.
it doesn't give kind of the biographical overview of who I am, but I think our listeners will see that I'm actually I'm pretty energized about this.
Yes.
And I like talking about it, and I like learning about it. And I think you'll see that in the upcoming guests that I have. And like I said, those have been recorded. My apologies to them because they haven't been released yet, but I have to get through this first hump to be able to do
Well,
it. But they're still relevant to this day because
Yes.
honestly, with the whole pandemic, things are just moving at a little bit of a snail's pace right now.
Yeah.
And I want to here really soon get in some of my peeps from my most recent film that I worked on, because that was just an interesting and kind of a crazy roller coaster ride of getting to there and then ultimately doing it. It was just like this 100-mile-an-hour kind of sprint that was so crazy, but it was fun. But I want to get some of them in to talk with them. I think the biggest thing for me right now, and it's this is something like Michelle said, this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time, with much coaxing and goading by her. But I felt it myself, and I do want to give back. And I do know that one of the biggest hurdles for me as a creative and being in this headspace for the last 25, 30 years is that it doesn't need to be that hard. It needs to, as a creative, the best thing to do is to go out and ultimately do, and learn from that process of doing. And I hope that what this podcast does is it inspires you, and it gives you confidence, and it gives you that fire under your ass to get you up and get out and do something. And hopefully on the side, it allows me to meet you, because one of the things in this business, this creative field that is always out there, and Michelle will agree with me, is that it's not about how much you know all the time. It's about who you know. And if you can find people out there by networking or working with people or finding projects or making projects, if you can go out there and meet those people and get to know them and network, my best bit of advice is shut your mouth and do more listening.
Right.
And it really will. And I know in this field, we all want to pump ourselves up because we feel that's the way that we're going to gain our confidence. And that's the easy way. The hard way, and probably the best way, is to keep your mouth shut, be an observer, be a listener, be a sponge, and learn from other people. And
I think that's life advice, though.
It is life advice,
it's
but
definitely
we
for
have to keep it
this.
from in the creative standpoint.
Yes.
Is that is the make or break in creativity, and that's where you see people fail.
Well, I think too, you have to realize that there will come a time when your vision cannot be completely actualized by just you. You will
Right.
need people to be on your team who are experts in their field, and to do that, you have to network, you have to get to know people, and you have to earn their respect. And
Gain their confidence.
yes. And I will say this about you is that you do that very well.
Why, thank you.
You're welcome. And I think
It's hard.
it is hard.
It's fun, but it's hard. Yeah.
Yes. And, I'm excited to listen to the podcasts with the guests that you've had on already and also hear the ones to come, because they are people who have produced. They have been doing things. They have been getting that out there, and they live on.
And they've been making mistakes in the
and
process.
They've been making mistakes, and they have day jobs, or they live on farms, or they don't live. These are not people that.
Yeah, these are typically not your Hollywood or Broadway types.
Right.
These are the kind of the boots on the ground, indie independent filmmakers, your little micro budget theater production companies. I mean,
Right.
that's the people that we want to talk to. Those are the people that are interesting, and they're inspiring because they are working with less.
Right.
And they are being more creative with the resources that they have. And that's something that's always intrigued me. It's always intrigued both of us, because
Right.
we've looked at a lot of that stuff. We started at that point, and that's kind of how we got to where we are and whatever we do.
How do you do this show with the least amount of money
Right.
and have it be still good production value,
Right.
And that's, I think, what is really relevant right now. It's not.
Well, it's the whole compass thing, it's making sure that you're going the right direction.
Right.
And sometimes our compasses are always pointed, north, but maybe sometimes north is actually south, and you need to be turning that compass around.
Right. Maybe you're getting from point A to point B, but you're going the wrong.
You're going the wrong way
You're
around.
going all the way around the world versus just 2 blocks over.
Yeah.
You're taking the really long route, and we've all done that. But I think that's why when we talk and you do the things you do, I see you inspiring people who at all different phases, people that, have a dream to do something, but are like, well, I can't do that because I don't have millions of dollars and I have to move to LA and all
Right.
that. And it's like, well, I mean, I guess you can do that, but you can do that here if you want.
It just depends on if you want to make $1 million do it.
I'm not promising you won't have to work a day job, but you can do
Sure.
it. And also, the people that are in kind of where you are, but need to be able to reach out to more different people in different realms of the film production and acting and things like that. This could be a great thing. And also talking with, higher level technical realm that me personally, I probably would not understand. But it's good to listen to those too, because it allows you to raise your awareness those things.
Which in turn gives
know,
you confidence and allows
Yeah.
you to get out there and start doing
and
that
able
stuff.
to talk with people in that way.
So I think, and again, I guess that's my goal of all of this. And my hope is that you as a listeners use this as a resource to be able to kind of scratch that itch, that creative itch that you have. My initial hope is I want to look at this through the lens of filmmaking and acting and theater and storytelling. But grandioso, big picture, moving down the road, I look at it and I want to bring in more to the fold because I know there's more out there. They're just unknowns to me right now. And so that's something that I want to be able to aspire for,
Right.
or to set that goal. But I will say this, and I just came up with this idea.
Oh no, it's on the fly.
And it's on the fly.
That's dangerous.
This was not thought
Maybe
out
you
ahead
will
of-
have to cut this.
I may have to cut this. But I will say this. I don't know how interesting our conversations are. I know they're kind of like
imagine a puffy couch and a puffy chair and
2 cups of coffee,
two cups
2
of
dogs,
coffee,
and kids running all over the
two
place.
labs, and yeah.
But I will say that I do, and I always have, and maybe that's why we're still married, is that we really enjoy the whole conversation. It doesn't matter what it is, but we can get onto a subject. I told her about this last night as we were laying in bed. I said, I think I'm just going to have you do this with me. And I was actually going to just pull her out of bed last night and say, let's go do the podcast right now. And because that's kind of my way of doing things.
Because he's up until 1 or 2 in
Yeah.
the morning.
But-
I go to bed at 9:30.
But the idea was that it hit me is that is what I need to have. I need to have someone to talk to. I cannot talk to myself. I have to have another human being to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And I think that is a testament to your creative process. And I think people need to realize that is that we're creative, not for ourselves. We're creative so that we can express ourselves to everyone
Right.
else. And so we need to make sure that we keep that in the back of our head. So the next time you want to create that next piece or do something, remember that there is a person out there that's going to have to look at it, and they're going to have to critique it, and they're going to have to give you a hug because they're proud of you, and they're going to have to give you all of those things that you have to have. So it's not an alone type of process.
Yeah.
It is a very 2-person at least process. But I want to say this, is that Michelle, we're going to do this again because this was fun.
I am a reoccurring guest.
If nothing else, but just to give me something to riff on.
There you go.
I think that's something that I really appreciate the most, is that I have learned a lot even sitting here with you, just by going through things and talking in a different format that we typically do, because nobody's usually listening to us. The dogs are, but they don't really care. And the kids, they're off doing their own thing. They don't really listen to us. Most of the time they're cracking jokes and trying to get us to laugh. But I think, is there anything you want to say in parting before we get off?
I mean, there's always something to say, but I'm afraid of going on too many tangents again. But I would say this, when you say about interaction and human interaction, there is something magical, and I'm sure there's a science behind it, or psychology, or auras. I don't even know. But this whole year has made me realize that there is something about face-to-face, person-to-person interaction, and doing it through a screen interrupts that magic.
It does.
And I can't wait until a time when we can all be face-to-face again and in groups again, because it is different.
Yeah.
There is some comforting, magical moment of being physically near someone and talking to
You're right.
them and interacting with them. It's just so different
Well,
than via Zoom or Microsoft, Teams, or whatever platform you use, not to plug those. by
not to
any
plug them
means.
or disparage them.
Or
Thank you very much
disparage
for your
them. I've
technology.
used both, obviously, because I can reference them. But, there is something about... Sorry. I keep getting too far away from the microphone. But there is something about being in person. There's just something about it.
Well, I think one thing that you miss, it's kind of like, the old analog, the record players, right? People have started to go back to those and listen to your old records because there is a higher fidelity that happens on those records.
Sure.
An MP3 actually cuts the top and the bottom off of it, right? But it's the same thing with a text message. When you have a text message and you go, "How are you today?" period, or "How are you today?" exclamation mark.
Question mark there.
Right. Right.
But question.
Well, and in today's day and age, we don't know what someone's going to use because sometimes they don't know what a question mark is used for. And that's not to disparage any certain group out there.
Not to go on another tangent.
Right, another tangent. But what we wind up missing in a lot of those things is we miss the tonal inflection. And people can complain about it all they want to or think that that's being nitpicky, but 98% of a conversation is because you're listening to this instead of reading it right now.
Right.
And it is about the tonal inflection, and it is the way that you express yourself and do it. And that's why actors, voice actors, that's why they get paid a pretty good amount of money, is because they've learned how to mess with that.
You know the next episode I want to be a guest on?
What's that?
I think at some point, like, you need to talk to a lot of more interesting people than me before then. But
you were the most interesting person I know.
I want to do the podcast where, like, we pick out all of the books that we've read that have really inspired us.
And changed our lives. Yeah, I think that's a good one. That is a good one.
Because we've both read quite a few books or listened.
I
like audio.
We'll do a top 3. We'll do a top 3 a piece of it. We'll do a top 3.
And then a combined top 3.
And we can't use the Bible. That's another one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a given.
I know, but you can't use, and that's, we always do that in interviews to kind of warm people up, is we'll ask them what's the most inspiring book.
I'm talking about just
self-help kind of
things
stuff.
that people wouldn't think of.
Sure.
That's the one I want to be on next.
Okay. We'll do that one next.
Write it down in your book.
Well, we'll just stop this and we'll do it. And then we'll just release it like 5 months from now.
I need to think about this. This takes thought. I've got a lot of good books.
It does.
I don't want to steer anyone in the wrong direction.
Well, I want to wrap this because we're at about an hour and a half. I don't want to cut too much because I need to get this thing.
We might be getting random now. We need to stop.
Yeah, we're getting random. But in closing is, number one, I want to thank my beautiful wife for, coming on and doing this with me, because it means a lot to me. It's almost making a tear come to my eye because I am very grateful for her and what she's done for me. But aside from that, I want to thank you, the guests, number one, for listening. Give me any and all feedback, and I'm going to be releasing this podcast. And if you love it, if you hate it, I don't care. I've got tough skin. I can deal with it. If you have any suggestions, any people to talk to, we're starting this thing from the bottom up. We have no sponsors. Right. We're not doing anything we're not trying to monetize this. We're doing it to be able to network and meet people.
Right. And have an outlet in a time of very few channels for outlets.
Sure.
It's
very much a big part of it.
Tell who your next guest is going to be.
My next guest is David Watson. He's the next podcast. Let's put it that way.
It may be 4 hours long because they talk so long that I feel like I have to go down and be like, it's 3 a.m.
So I had to cut it.
You need to go home, David.
I had to cut it massively because that episode was around 4.5 hours long.
I know. That's
why I had to cut.
Not surprising.
A ton of it. And there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to keep, but it was more of a ramble about films and what we like.
Right.
But that one's getting released. And then we've got Ducon Williams, who is a writer, director, actor.
Award-winning. Director and actor.
He just finished up a film last year called Vincent's Vow, and it's actually how I got to meet a lot of people. We've also got Mickey Stone, who is a local celebrity actor. He's in, if you've seen any of the horror films or where anybody's getting killed or beat up, Mickey Stone's your guy. He's a badass. And not only is he a badass, he's like one of the sweetest guys I know.
He's super nice.
And I didn't like him at all when I first met him because that actor animosity that you have about people, like, oh, everybody says he's the best, I'm the best, anyways. I didn't like him, but then the first day on set I met him and I just fell in love with him, and we became great friends from that process. I've got Kong Tao coming in. Kong is the local.
I don't know Kong, but I've heard you talk about him so much that I feel like I know him.
Yeah, he's hilarious, and he's the local audio engineer guru along with Jamie Talamantes, which I hope to have her on because she's a firecracker.
She makes music too.
Yeah, she's a music maker. So I've got some really good people coming on, and they're in this wheelhouse that we're talking about. People that have had to get over the humps to get out there and start creating and just use the resources at their disposal. And that's what this podcast is all about.
Yeah.
So
guerrilla filmmaking.
Guerrilla filmmaking.
I love that term. I do. It's like hardcore.
It is. It is hardcore.
Yeah.
It's nasty. But awesome. Well, that was good, hon.
Are we using this one?
I think we're going to use this one. Yeah.
Number 100. It did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're welcome.
You are my muse.
Next scene.
Guys, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to call that a wrap. We're done. And stay tuned for the podcast next week.
Bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to the Bravo Creative Podcast. Analysis of your biometrics have been compiled and calculated. You are now a minuscule part of the collective. Enjoy the rest of your pitiful day.